Hi everyone, today we are going to be starting lesson 2, part 1, and the whole focus of this is to evaluate the pros and cons of telling a story using different types of mediums. So through text, through film, through music. We are focusing on the story Les Miserables. If you haven't already, complete the quick ed puzzle on Google Classroom that tells you some background information on the story, and then you can listen to me read it. I'm going to start reading some of the intro, and then I'll get into the actual story. It is also written in text on the Google Classroom classwork page if you want to follow along while I read. Okay, so here we go. After 19 years in prison, Jean Valjean is released on parole by the policeman Javert. By law, Valjean must display a yellow ticket of leave which identifies him as an ex-convict. As a convict, Valjean is shunned by society. Though a local bishop offers him food and shelter, overnight, Jean Valjean steals the bishop's silver and flees, but is captured by the police. The bishop tells the police that the silver was a gift, and not only lets him keep the silver he stole, but also gives him 2 more valuable candlesticks. The bishop tells Valjean that he must use the silver to become an honest man. Ashamed yet humbled by the bishop's kindness, Valjean decides another story must begin. He tears up his yellow ticket, breaks his parole, and resolves to redeem his sins. 8 years later, in 1823, Valjean assumed a new identity as Monsieur Madeleine, a wealthy factory owner and mayor of Monsieur-sur-Mer. One of his workers discovers that Fantine, another worker, is sending money to her secret illegitimate daughter, Cosette. If someone is illegitimate, it just means that their parents weren't married when they were born. Cosette lives with an innkeeper and his wife. Fantine and the worker fight. Valjean breaks up the conflict but asks the factory foreman to resolve it. The other women demand Fantine's dismissal. Fantine reflects on her broken dreams about Cosette's father who left her. Desperate for money, she sells her locket and hair. When she fights back against an abusive man, Javert, who is the same police inspector stationed in that town, and he's looking for Jean Valjean, Javert arrests her. Valjean arrives and, realizing his part in Fantine's circumstances, orders Javert release her before taking her to the hospital. Valjean resolves to take care of her daughter Cosette. Before he can do so, however, Javert, who eventually recognizes Valjean as a prisoner, arrives at the hospital to arrest him. So all of this is going on at the same time. We have Fantine, who is just fired for her job for paying for her daughter, who is illegitimate. So that is seen as a shame or a scandal at that time. And she's living on the streets. And Jean Valjean realizes this, and he wants to try to make the wrong a right, and he wants to try to take care of her and Cosette. But then you have Javert, who's a police officer, who wants to arrest Cosette and take her into prison, but then also realizes that he's seeing Jean Valjean right in front of him and wants to take Jean Valjean at the same time. So we're going to start that scene of the story. Fantine had not seen Javert since the day on which Valjean had saved her from the man. Her ailing brain comprehended nothing, but the only thing which she did not doubt was that he had come to get her. He, meaning Javert, had come to get her. She could not endure that terrible face. She felt her life quitting her. She hid her face in both hands and shrieked in her anguish, "Monsieur Madeleine, save me!" Jean Valjean, who is Monsieur Madeleine, had risen. He said to Fantine in the gentlest and calmest of voices, "Be at ease. It is not for you that he has come." Then he addressed Javert and said, "I know what you want." Javert replied, "Be quick about it." As he spoke thus, he did not advance a single step. He hurled at Jean Valjean a glance which threw out like a grappling hook. At Javert's explanation, Fantine opened her eyes once more, but Jean Valjean was there. What had she to fear? Javert advanced to the middle of the room and cried, "See here now, art thou coming?" The unhappy woman glanced about. No one was present except Monsieur Madeleine and Valjean. To whom could that abject use of thou be addressed? To her only, she shuddered. She doesn't see that Javert is there. Then she beheld an unprecedented thing, a thing so unprecedented, nothing equal to it had appeared to her even in her blackest deliriums of fever. She beheld Javert. Now she finally sees him. The police spy seized Valjean by the collar. She saw him bow his head. It seemed to her that the world was coming to an end. Javert made no attempt to disengage the hand which grasped the collar of his coat. He said, "Javert." Javert interrupted him. "Call me Mr. Inspector." "Monsieur," said Jean Valjean, "I should like to say a word to you in private." "Aloud, say it aloud," replied Javert. "People are in the habit of talking aloud to me." Jean Valjean went on in a lower tone. "I have a request to make of you. I tell you to speak loud, but you alone should hear it. What difference does it make? I shall not listen." Jean Valjean turns toward him and says very rapidly in a very low voice, "Grant me 3 days' grace, 3 days in which I can go fetch her child of this unhappy woman, and I will pay whatever is necessary. You shall accompany me if you choose." "You are making sport of me," cried Javert. "Come on. I did not think you such a fool. You asked me to give you 3 days in which to run away." Fantine was seized with a fit of trembling. "My child," she cried. "To go and fetch my child. She is not here. I want my child, Monsieur Madeleine, Monsieur le Maire." Javert stamped his foot. "And now there's the other one. Will you hold your tongue, you hussy?" He stared intently at Fantine, once more taking into his grasp Jean Valjean's shirt and collar. "There is a thief, a convict named Jean Valjean, and I have him in my grasp. That's what there is." Fantine raised herself in bed with a bound, supporting herself on her stiffened arms, and on both hands she gazed at Jean Valjean. She gazed at Javert. She gazed at the nun. She opened her mouth as though to speak. A rattle proceeded from the depths of her throat. Her teeth clattered. She stretched out her arms in agony, opening her hands convulsively and fumbling about her like a drowning person, then suddenly fell back on her pillow. She was dead. Jean Valjean laid his hand upon the detaining hand of Javert and opened it as he would have opened the hand of a baby. Then he said to Javert, "You have murdered this woman." "Let's have an end to this," shouted Javert in fury. "I am not here to argument, or to listen to argument." Javert retreated towards the door. Jean Valjean, armed with his bar of iron, walked slowly up to Fantine's couch. When he arrived there, he turned and he said to Javert in a voice that was barely audible, "I advise you do not disturb me at this moment. One thing is certain, and that is that Javert trembled." Jean Valjean rested his elbow on the knob of the head of the bed and his brow on his hand, and began to contemplate the motionless body of Fantine, which lay extended there. He remained thus, mute, absorbed, evidently with no further thought of anything connected with this life. After a few moments of this meditation, he bent towards Fantine and spoke to her in a low voice. What did he say to her? What could this man who was reproved say to that woman who was dead? What words were those? No one on earth heard them. Did the dead woman hear them? The point as which there exists no doubt is that Sister Simplice, the nun who was there, the sole witness of the incident, often said at the moment that Jean Valjean whispered in Fantine's ear, she distinctly beheld a smile dawn on those pale lips. Jean Valjean took Fantine's head in both of his hands and arranged it on the pillow as a mother might have done for her child. Then he tied the string of her chemise and smoothed her hair back under her cap. That done, he closed her eyes. Fantine's face seemed strangely illuminated at that moment. Death that signifies entrance into the great light. Fantine's hand was hanging over the side of the bed. Jean Valjean knelt down before that hand, lifted it gently, and kissed it. Okay. So that is the excerpt. There are 2 questions on the lesson 2, part 1 that I'd like you to answer. And when you're done with that, you can just submit it to Google Classroom, and I will see you soon. I miss you.